Hey, everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with my friend Richard Hull to discuss his new documentary, Fighting Spirit of Combat's Chaplin's Journey. What a great documentary, Richard. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks for having me on, Craig.
My pleasure. We spoke about this film a few months ago, and I didn't really have any expectations, but when it came across and I watched it, like I said, when it got to the end, I wanted more. It was a really great documentary. But in case people haven't seen it or they haven't heard about it, can you tell us a little about the film?
Sure. It's been a 4-year labor of love, passion project, and it's been an amazing journey. The word journey is in the title of the movie, and I've kind of gone on my own journey as well. And so I was brought into this project by my friends at Paulus Productions, which is a production company based in Los Angeles. It's a nonprofit. It was started 60 years ago by a Catholic priest. And they decided that they wanted to make a movie about military chaplains. And so I had made a documentary years ago with Halle Berry and the U.S. Army about Black soldiers that had fought in all the U.S. wars we ever had. And Halle and I won the NAACP Image Award that year, some other awards. And so I had a bit of a shorthand with the military. And so it was my job to get the military to pay attention to this project. If you want to create a project about the military, you kind of want their blessing. And so we got that. And then as we went on through the journey of developing the story and the stories that we would tell in this documentary, I ultimately decided to step in and direct it. And much of that was just motivated by the fact that I didn't know anything about military chaplains. I didn't even know that it existed as a profession. And it's obviously far more than a profession. It's not a job people do for a paycheck. It is a job that people do because it's a far higher calling. And so military chaplains go to war, but they wear a uniform and they don't carry a weapon, which means why in the world would you do that job? Obviously, it's motivated by something that is hard to put into words. And yet that very loving calling that they have where they're out there serving soldiers who are out there serving us as Americans kind of collides with the chaos of war. And I thought, man, we've never seen that explored cinematically before. Wouldn't that really be interesting? And so I, as a non-veteran, my dad was a veteran. I've got lots of family members who are veterans. I decided I'm going to jump into this. I'm going to learn about it. And then I started building like a group of, people that were going to do this with me. And it was people like Jeff Strucker, who's a former Army combat chaplain, who I remembered his story from the movie Black Hawk Down. And I thought, oh, let's call that guy. I bet that guy would love to be involved. And my partner, Chris Pratt, who, biggest movie star in the world, perhaps, and is a very military focused guy and a very faith forward guy. And I called him and I'm like, you want to be involved in this? And it's like we built this sort of like big tent of people that really just wanted to go and tell these stories. And, from that, this movie was born.
Wow. I mean, you said so many important things. One, I agree. And just so people know, I mean, you have a huge background in film and media. I mean, I know very nonchalant, but you produced over 25 films. You created that amazing platform. Was it VIX, right? I mean, so you've been in the business, but it's interesting, two parts. One is same thing. I did a documentary a couple of years ago on boxing. I didn't really know much about boxing, but I think when God calls us or uses us to tell stories like that, and we don't really have sort of like I was in the middle of it, so I didn't really know much about it, so I didn't lean either way. And in the end, it turned out to be an Emmy nominated documentary. And like your film, I can easily see this becoming an Emmy winning documentary. But you said a lot of things too. And then even like when you mentioned about chaplains in general, like I didn't really know much about chaplains either. And I actually now I have a lot of friends that are chaplains, FDNY, NYPD. And when I talk to them on the phone and I hear what they go through, how they're there in the moment with their families, consoling the families and it's terrible with a building's on fire and they're there alongside. And I know military chaplains as well. And I didn't really think about it. And one thing in the film, I don't want to go too far ahead, but the PTSD, like we know PTSD and people in the military suffer from that, but I never even thought about it from the perspective of a priest or a pastor or a Christian or anyone, a chaplain. And it's the same thing. Like when we see our priests or we see our pastors, we're so concerned about telling them about what's going on in our lives, but we never actually take the time to sit there and say, how are you doing? And to hear about the PTSD when they return from war and how they dealt with that. I mean, it's so challenging. I mean, you spoke about so many important things in this film. I reflected on that, and I still am now. I'm like, it makes me think a little bit differently about my priests, my friends, the people that care for me, that I have to be there for them. So when you were working on this, I mean, first of all, how did you decide on these four chaplains? I mean, there was so many chaplains. There was the four, and then there were a few others. But how did you decide on which ones to choose?
Well, I think what you said about the PTSD is really timely. You know, the leading cause of death in the military is not getting shot at war, it's suicide. And this is the group that has decided that they're going to turn that around, and they are. So, like, that is really important. And I think, as you point out, for them as humans, the chaplains as humans, they have their own set of issues that come with taking on everybody else's problems. And they have to figure that out. In the film, they call that compassion fatigue. And I think that's probably a good word for it. And the also in the movie, someone says the line "scars on your soul," that going to battle like leaves scars on your soul. I think that's such a powerful, powerful line. And these are the guys that are doing it. And as also someone says in the film, like, people don't usually come to the chaplain on the best day of their life. They come on the worst day of their life and say, "Can you help me out?" And if you, in my experience, talking to veterans, 100% of them have a story about a chaplain. It may just have been a moment where the chaplain had a tiny influence on their life, or it could have been a giant moment where the chaplain saved their life. But the chaplains are revered throughout the military, and they occupy positions everywhere. They're on military bases, they're at hospitals, they're dealing with families, but the tip of the spear are the ones that go to combat. And they're the ones that are truly out there on the front lines. And I think that's really fascinating. And that's the story that we chose to tell here, because there's been 419 chaplains throughout American history since the chaplains were instituted into the military by George Washington. Every single US battle has had a chaplain there. And 419 of those have lost their lives. And we don't know those stories. And that's what I find so interesting, because the chaplains don't like to be part of the story.
Mm.
And so we've had to drag these stories out of them. So when we were sitting around trying to choose what stories are we going to tell, you would, we were collaborating with the Army Chaplain Corps, and we'd say, "What stories do you want to tell?" And they're like, "No, it's okay. It's okay. Just tell soldier stories." We're like, "No, no, no. We want to tell your story for the first time ever." And so it really changed the dynamic for them. I don't think they were used to being in the spotlight. And that was part of the joy of the whole thing, is that most of us don't know about those people if you're not a veteran. And I think that's really what audiences are reacting to. We've been on this journey for the last couple months, just previewing the movie in advance of the theatrical release on Friday, November 8th for Veterans Day. And it started with a screening at the Pope's house in Rome. So, the Vatican has
Wow.
their own. It was amazing. And
I didn't know that. I'm impressed.
it was super incredible. I mean, first of all, it made my Catholic mother very proud, but the Vatican has its own,
I have my Pope flag right here.
I love it.
I was just in the Vatican about 2 weeks ago, so I love the Vatican.
I love it. I mean, look, the Vatican City has their own theater thing, but the Pope has a screening room in his house that was built in 900 AD. It's an old chapel. And so just the act of kind of going into his compound, going through the Swiss Guard, just feeling the weight of history on you, and the people that get invited to screen their films at this screening room is they're the household names of our industry. It's Martin Scorsese, and it's a very short list of people. So to have the Pope invite us to come and screen the movie there was just an incredible honor and a great way to kick off kind of these advanced screenings. But when you're sitting in those screenings, and me as a filmmaker, the lights come up and you look around the audience, and half the audience has got tears running down their face. And some of it is the military people or military families. And I think some of them feel like this touches a place of their experience and gives a voice to their experience and helps them convey to their family and their friends and their community of like what they went through. I think for people of faith, it's a real sort of like powerful moment, because it's a real unique way of explaining how you go live your faith on a day-to-day basis. I think for people that don't have a connection to either, it really is powerful, because it's this peek into this world that no one knew existed. So like, it really checks a lot of boxes, I think, and so ultimately we chose these stories because we thought that they were the ones that would represent a diverse group of people. And then we used a diverse group of chaplains and others to tell the story. And, you know, the journey phrase in the movie's title, Fighting Spirit, A Combat Chaplain's Journey, is intentionally ambiguous. I didn't really want people to know whose journey it was, because there's a lot of journeys in there. And then, you know, I as a filmmaker went on a journey and the audience goes on a journey. And so the word journey, I think, is very important to what we're trying to convey here.
No, you're right. And like you said, because you had such a diverse group, and it's sort of like each person is on a different journey based on maybe their experiences or their background. But in the end, it all shows us that regardless of our, denomination or theology, we're all united through love. And at the end, when they all recite, was it Psalm 24, and they're all different denominations and religions, I mean, that's powerful because it's all about love. And the one person that really stuck out for me was Chaplain Kapaun, right? I mean, I heard his story. I wasn't familiar with his story, and I always try to put myself in that situation. Like today, I was just at church. It was All Saints Day, and I'm thinking about they mentioned Maxim Colby, right? And I'm thinking about his story, just like this Chaplain story, and I'm saying to myself, if I was put in that situation, well, let's just you and I ask this question, reflect on it. What would you do? I mean, I'm going to death. I know I'm going to die. Would I be praying for the ones that are sending me to my death? Would I be able to sacrifice my own life for someone else, for a stranger? I mean, when you put yourself in those situations, it's easy to say when I'm home and I'm in my house and it's warm, but imagine being in that situation. I mean, that's when we're really called, right? Our test of faith. I don't know what I would do. And I do pray that if I'm ever in that situation, that I would make the right choice. But I mean, Richard, do you ever reflect on that, or did you reflect on his story?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not sure I would ever be in that position, because before Chaplain Kapaun died in that prisoner of war camp, they gave him the opportunity to leave, and he chose to stay. I'd be like, great, sign me up, I'm out, you know? And so it takes a really unique person to say, no, 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 I'm going to stay here, knowing that it meant his certain death. So I'd love to say that I would rise to the occasion, but it's you surely never know, as you point out. And the thing that's so unique for me about Chaplain Kapaun's story is that we never intended to tell that story. We set out with a plan in making a documentary, and the plan ended up taking a complete left turn. We were sitting in the edit room having shot a bunch of interviews with current and former military chaplains and the chief of chaplains of all the different branches of the military, and very senior leadership to talk about it, and people that really had something to say. And suddenly we looked up, and Father Kapaun's remains had been identified after 70 years. He died in the prisoner of war camp in Korea, but then when he was buried there, that was it. Like, everyone sort of lost track of him, and the military has been working on identifying his remains and other missing soldiers' remains. And so it was like a sign from the universe when we were sitting around trying to find the voice of the movie, and we hadn't been able to find it yet, that suddenly this opportunity presented itself. And so we said, well, we're not quite sure how his story is going to fit into our work, but it probably will. So we took my partner, Justin Roberts, who co-directed the movie with me and is a veteran, a former Army chaplain, and we sent him to Father Kapaun's funeral and with a camera crew. And we said, just go shoot it. And if you know anything about the Catholic Church and the military, they know how to put on a show. And so when Justin showed up, he was pretty convinced he was going to be the only guy there. And in fact, people had come from far and wide to celebrate not just Father Kapaun, but all military chaplains. And so it was a really powerful, overwhelming experience for Justin, because, as you pointed out, he had come back home. He was in the sort of next act of his career past the military. He was trying to figure out what he wanted to do and be, and was struggling with that. And so this journey to Father Kapaun's funeral had such an incredible and pivotal moment for him that kind of changed the direction of his life and gave him a lot of healing. And all of that together is sort of where we found the heartbeat for the movie. And we kind of strung Justin's story and Father Kapaun's story and some of the other stories we wanted to tell together. And I think that's kind of where the magic happened. I think that's where the audience is really, gets connected to the movie, quite frankly. And, obviously Father Capon has got an incredible story. So much so that, the Pope has got him on a path to potentially become our next saint. And, that's pretty incredible to have a US born saint at the Vatican. That would be pretty amazing. So there were so many signs pointing to, embrace this, figure out a way to include this in your story. And we did. And I think that's where so much of the power comes from in the film.
No, I agree. And that's how you see the hand of God, because what are the chances of that happening at that point? And that becomes not one of the most powerful parts of the film, but the way it's sort of weaved in, and then the end of it, it's sort of you're on this journey. I mean, things like that don't happen. And then when you look back, you go, oh, that's the hand of God. But in a documentary, I mean, I would have we're always filming something, and I have this idea. With a documentary, you do one interview, all of a sudden you're on this direction, this completely different direction. You're like, I never saw it going that way. But I mean, and also to be able to screen a film at the Vatican, I mean, that's a dream of ours. And like I said earlier, we're also working on a document. Well, we did a document, now we're doing the film on an army chaplain. And my goal or my vision has been that hopefully he's canonized when the film is released. So we share sort of that same sort of idea or vision. And in the film too, there was something I thought was interesting. And I think it's towards the end where somebody says, can one person make a difference? And I think a lot of us, some of us believe that, some of us don't, and I think we all have the ability, and I think might have been Chaplain Kapaun that says it. I'm not sure, but when you think about that and you say, we all have that ability to really make a difference, whether we're impacting someone's life or changing the world, whatever it might be, but we all have that ability. And throughout this film, you see so many chaplains and so many people that gave their life, that did what they were called to do, and they really impacted so many people. And I don't know if they realized that, throughout their journey, but when we look back in some of those interviews and you see how many people were really impacted by one person's life, it's so inspiring. I mean, really, it's inspiring. So tell me now, okay, so I obviously was impacted by the film. I reflected on a lot. What do you hope people walk away with from this film? Because one thing too, that when I did this project on chaplains years ago, one of my goals was to show priests in a different light. Because I believe that if I would have, I don't know, if I would have known about chaplains, maybe I would have thought about becoming a priest, later on, or maybe when I was younger. But when I learned about my friend who's the chaplain for the Mets, I said, how enticing and interesting that would be. And that can maybe help or increase vocations. If you know that I can actually be in the military, or I could be, the chaplain for the FDNY. What do you hope people walk away with after watching this film?
Well, I think part of it is what you said, which is, can one person make a difference, right? And I think one of the stories that's really powerful for me that we tell in the movie is the story that was given to us by the former chief of chaplains, Tom Soljan. And he tells this story about how he took off of all of his gear in Iraq and walked out into the middle of battle, and everything came to a screeching halt, and he was able to essentially find a moment of peace with the enemy. And all of that led to a lot less killing. And that was a story. First of all, that was one guy impacting a lot of lives, but that was a story that too we never intended to tell. We went to Chief Soljan to help us tell some of the historical stories, and between takes, he just started talking and told us the story. And luckily the camera was still running and it made it in. And it was a perfect example of one guy making a difference. But so I hope there's an element of that people walk away from. But I think there's also another call to action too, which is, so much of what happens in the military impacts your life later on when you come home. And you're never going to be the same person when you come back from war that you were when you went into war. Now, you may be a better person, but you're going to be different. And so I think all of us owe it to our military to check in on them, see how they're doing, tell them how we feel about them, because there's a lot that happens out there when they're protecting our freedoms that they bring home. And it's up to us to help them, make sense of that, make sure they're okay. They took care of a lot of soldiers. We need to take care of them. That's an opportunity for one person to truly make a difference. And you're right. I do think that it can spur a calling for some people. That calling could just be being that one person that does something that changes the world in a small way, or it could be something big, like changing the direction of your life. And as you point out, going into the priesthood or going into the Army Chaplain Corps. There are partners on this. They want to spotlight this as a vocation so that people will think, oh, I didn't really realize that that was an option. Um, you know, I think most people don't know that being the Mets chaplain is an option. Well, this is a different option. And what I think is so cool about it is that military chaplains come from all faiths, right? They represent every single faith you can think of: Catholic, Protestant, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, you name it. But when you're in battle and you're out there and you're wearing a uniform, carrying no weapon, working with soldiers, you're working with people of all faiths and no faith. And you got to figure out a way to communicate with them and help them solve some very life or death questions. That's interesting. I mean, that's just incredibly fascinating to me. And that's what we wanted to expose really for the world in the film.
Mm. And very interesting. And one thing too, I thought about, that old saying, "There's no atheist in foxholes." I was
Mhm.
wondering, like, in battle versus when you come home, do you know just from your experience, did you see an increase or a decrease when they were at war with their faith, connection to faith, versus when they came home? Did they grow stronger in their faith? Did it sort of dissipate? What happened when they were there versus when they came home?
Well, I think if you enter war as a person of faith, it probably strengthens your faith. And I think if you enter war as a person of no faith, it probably makes you think, this faith thing, I wonder if it's for me. And so I think it causes just a lot of questions. And so I do think that a lot of people come home stronger. And I think that's great. And for those that don't, like, it's up to the rest of us to help them become stronger.
That's right. It is our job. You're right. I mean, as much as we can, use whatever platform we can, whatever gift that we have to proclaim the gospel, inspire people. And it's great film. I'm telling you, there's so much more I can talk about and just reflect on, but you really have it's a really good documentary, and I advise people to watch it and be inspired by it. And to, like I said earlier, I do feel for priests and pastors, and so many friends of mine are pastors and priests. And when I see them, when I'm with them, and I see people come up to them, and they're constantly, telling them about their issues and what they're going through, and they're always there for them. I mean, all my priest friends are there for them. They're always paying attention. They love, they care for them. But before sort of express what you're going through, just take a moment and just ask them, how are you doing? Without any sort of motives or intentions, or just, waiting for a pause where you can jump in. Just sit there and listen to them. The way Jesus like sat there and is extremely intentional. He listened to every single person. And that's what we need to do, because like you expressed in this film, some of these chaplains and soldiers that come home from war with the PTSD, like they just need somebody to sit there and listen to them, and to show them love and affection and compassion. I mean, they risked their lives for us so we could sit home and I can sit in my office and be with my family. So, Richard, thank you so much for this really impactful and inspiring film. Really great job.
Thank you so much. And thanks for, helping us get the word out. So it's coming to theaters Friday, November 8th. It's only in theaters. That's very intentional. We obviously are celebrating Veterans Day, but it's also a few days after the presidential election. And what a great opportunity for people of all different walks of life to come together in their theater as a community, have the lights go down, find something that is common ground that they can agree on. Like, I feel like the country is really looking for that moment of healing, and we intended to provide that by putting it in theaters. The flip side is, I might argue maybe we're a superhero movie, but we don't have a superhero movie marketing budget. And so we're relying on people like you, Craig, and the people that are your audience to go support the movie, see it in theaters, tell their friends, bring their friends. And if you like seeing these types of movies in theaters, the theater owners will respond to that, and they will say, oh, they showed up to support Fighting Spirit, A Combat Chaplain's Journey. Let's bring more of these movies. And so if people want to find out the movie theater in their neighborhood, they can go to fightingspiritfilm.com. So it's fightingspiritfilm.com. And we'll be adding movie theaters up until almost the very last day. That's kind of the nature of the movie theater business these days. It's kind of a last minute business. And so if you go there and you don't see your theater that's close, keep checking. It'll probably pop up because it's going to be across the country. And so I really hope that people will show up and support us.
And that's exactly right. You need to go to the theater. How many people say there's not enough faith-based films or you can't? It's because we're not going to the theaters. We're like, well, wait until they go on demand. And first of all, it's like $30 to watch a film on demand, and my local theater is only $6.50. So I'd rather go to the movie theater any day than sit home and rent it from Fios or Verizon, whatever platform you have. But Richard, like we said, we advise people to go see the film. Veterans Day is coming up. November 8th, the film will be in theaters, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and God bless you and all the work that you do.
Thanks so much, Craig.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember you have the ability to inspire and evangelize your words and actions. God bless you.